Edgar Morin and the three pillars behind complex thinking. We tend to treat big intellectual frameworks like they fell from the sky fully formed, like a philosophical meteor that landed and instantly reorganized human knowledge. But this article quietly suggests something more unsettling. Edgar Morin's complex thinking often gets presented as a radical break from normal science, a new way of seeing reality that escapes the old traps of reductionism. And yet, the closer you look, the more you notice that Morin's ideas are stitched together through older, very concrete scientific traditions, especially cybernetics, general systems theory, and information theory. So here's the guiding question I want to hold on to today. If complex thinking is meant to outgrow those founding theories, what exactly does it take from them? What does it reject? And how do we tell the difference between a powerful critique and an unfair one? Welcome to the channel. Here I explore scientific research in a way that helps us think, not just memorize. If that interests you, you're welcome to subscribe. The article we're using today is not an experiment, not a survey, and not a dataset-heavy statistical paper. It's something different, an analytical study of ideas. That matters because the way we evaluate evidence has to match the kind of question being asked. The authors are not asking whether complex thinking works in practice, but how it emerged and how Morin both used and challenged three key foundations of complexity science. So the evidence here is not numbers, it's texts, comparisons, and argumentation. The authors say they analyzed the 6 volumes of La Méthode, Morin's long project written from 1977 to 2004, and they track how Morin engages with Norbert Wiener's Cybernetics, Ludwig von Bertalanffy's general systems theory, and Claude Shannon's information theory. They do not claim these are Morin's only influences, but they show that these three are central and repeatedly present in his work. Already, you can feel the intellectual tension. Morin refuses simplification, the separation between observer and observed, and the old idea that dividing reality into parts is enough to understand the whole. Yet his toolbox includes theories built to study control, communication, systems, and information. Fields that can easily become reductionist or technocratic. So what does Morin do with them? Let's start with cybernetics. The authors describe cybernetics as having a profound influence on Morin. Morin himself is quoted saying he both supported and opposed cybernetic theory. That's not a polite academic hedge. It's a core feature of how he thinks, using something while resisting what it tends to become. On the in favor side, Morin credits cybernetics with helping transform organization into a serious scientific object. That's a huge move. Organization is not just a decorative word. Cybernetics made it possible to study how systems regulate themselves, respond to feedback, and maintain control, instead of treating organization as a vague metaphor. The article also highlights something Morin valued deeply. Cybernetics broke disciplinary boundaries. Morin mentions a wide range of cybernetics-related thinkers from different fields, showing that cybernetics did not stay in one intellectual neighborhood. It traveled, and Morin loves intellectual travelers. Then there's feedback, the concept most people associate with cybernetics. The authors explain how later, second-order cybernetics emphasized both positive and negative feedback, and how these mechanisms help explain emergence, how systems produce behaviors you can't predict just by studying isolated parts. Morin uses feedback not just in machines, but in life, society, and culture. So far, cybernetics sounds like a gift. But then Morin turns, and his criticism is sharp. One critique is that Wiener did not develop what Morin considers a full theory of the machine. Morin expands the idea of machine far beyond human-made devices. For him, machines include stars, living beings, and societies, entities that transform, produce, and organize. From that perspective, traditional cybernetics becomes too narrow, too centered on artificial machines. Morin also criticizes early cybernetics for leaving ideas like positive feedback and complex causality underdeveloped, but the authors add a key nuance. Some of those ideas came later, so his critique may treat cybernetics as frozen in time, instead of recognizing that the field was still evolving. Then comes a more political and ethical worry: the way communication and control can be used to subdue society. The authors emphasize that Morin treats this not simply as a flaw in the science, but as an ideological use of science. Still, it's a warning about how easily scientific ideas can be recruited into social management. Morin also insists on two missing pieces: disorder and the self. Disorder for him isn't just a problem to eliminate, it's a productive force. Without disorder, you don't get reorganization, change, or emergence, and the self matters because Morin rejects the fantasy of a neutral observer. He treats the scientist's position, perspective, and even personality as part of what shapes knowledge. And that last point is where the discussion stops being technical and starts getting personal. Because if Morin is right, then the question isn't only what does cybernetics explain, it's also what does my way of looking allow me to notice and what does it make me ignore. Now let's move to systems theory. The authors say Morin's focus here is less than with cybernetics, possibly because systems theory is more general and applied across many areas. Still, systems become a backbone for Morin's thinking. Morin defines a system as an organized global unity of interrelations among elements, actions, and individuals, and the emphasis on organized matters. He thinks system and organization are often treated separately in normal science, and he tries to connect them as aspects of the same reality. A key concept here is the open system. Von Bertalanffy defines open systems as exchanging matter with their environment. Morin pushes the idea further. There is no perfectly closed system and no completely open one. Every system needs openings to interact with an environment and closures to preserve identity. So Morin's systems are never isolated and never pure. But again, Morin warns against simplification. Seeing only the whole can make systems look fixed. Seeing only the parts can make us miss emergence. For him, a system needs some closure to keep its identity, but total closure is impossible. Simply existing already means interacting with something else. At this point, you might notice a pattern. Morin keeps accepting a theory's most powerful insight, then refusing its most seductive mistake. And now we reach information theory, where Morin's relationship becomes both deeply appreciative and deeply combative. The authors explain that information concepts sit at the center of cybernetics and systems theory, but Morin delves deeply into informational issues and then launches a stark criticism of Shannon's approach. Morin recognizes Shannon's importance, and the article notes that Morin even discusses Shannon's statistical information and links it to entropy through other thinkers. The authors also mention how developments in biology, especially DNA, made information feel like part of life itself. But Morin insists on something he calls the generativity of information, the ability to create new information. For him, that's closely tied to life, evolution, and organization. And he argues you cannot isolate information from the apparatus that generates it, or from biological, human, and social context. He also uses ecosystems as an example of complex communication: chemical signals, sounds, gestures, visuals, multiple channels, multiple layers. Then comes the critical turn. Morin complains Shannon doesn't deal with meaning and implicitly hides an anthroposociological metasystem. He argues living organization is too complex for Shannon's framework, which doesn't measure complexity in the richer sense Morin wants. He also reverses Shannon-like assumptions about noise and redundancy. Noise is not only a disturbance, errors can generate variation, and variation can enable evolution. Redundancy is not only waste, it can protect against catastrophic disruption. In Morin's view, errors and redundancies can compensate and help stabilize life. And yet the authors do something really useful here. They slow down and test Morin's criticism against what Shannon's theory actually claims to be. In the conclusion, they argue Morin may misunderstand the objective of Shannon's information theory. Shannon explicitly brackets meaning as outside the theory's scope. Expecting a theory designed to predict and correct transmission of symbols to also model semantics and social meaning may be an unfair demand. In other words, a theory can be incomplete for your purposes without being wrong within its own purpose. This is one of the most important, critical reading lessons in the whole article. When you criticize a study or a theory, you have to ask, am I criticizing it for failing at its own goal, or for failing at a goal I personally wish it had? Those are not the same. Now, if we step back, what does this paper actually conclude about Morin? Beyond showing how his thinking draws from and reshapes key scientific traditions, the authors also turn the lens back on Morin himself. Some scholars argue that Morin proposes a new science without clearly explaining how to build it. Others see his work as too abstract or lacking mathematical grounding. The point is not to dismiss him, but to remember that Morin, too, belongs to the evolving world of ideas he studies. And that feels appropriate. Because if complex thinking means anything, it is precisely this: resisting the urge to turn any thinker into a closed system. This information is based on the article The Emergence of Edgar Morin's Complex Thinking, written by Ennio A. Blay and José Roberto C. Piquera, published in 2024 in the journal Anéis de Academia Brasileira de Ciências, Annals of the Brazilian Academy of Sciences, associated with the Universidade de São Paulo in Brazil. So where does that leave us with our guiding question? If complex thinking is meant to outgrow its foundations, what does it take? What does it reject? And how do we tell a powerful critique from an unfair one? This article shows one answer. You can't judge that question by vibe. You judge it by tracing the intellectual lineage, comparing claims to original purposes, and staying alert to the difference between this theory is limited and this theory failed. It also shows something more human. Morin's thinking pushes us to hold opposites without forcing a cheap resolution. Order and disorder, openness and closure, machine and life, information as measure and information as meaning. But holding opposites responsibly requires discipline. Otherwise, complexity becomes a decorative word you hang over confusion like a fancy curtain. The real responsibility is epistemic, knowing what your evidence can support and refusing to claim more than it can. So here's a final question I genuinely think is worth carrying with you. When you encounter a grand explanation, whether it's scientific, political, or philosophical, do you ask what it includes, or do you also ask what it had to exclude in order to feel complete? If you want to keep exploring questions like this, you're welcome to treat this channel as a space to learn how to think with evidence through scientific research. And if there's a specific scientific article you'd like me to analyze in a future video, you can suggest it in the comments. Many of the best ideas for Pedagogo start exactly that way. I am Mao Chiunti, and I'm a pedagogue.